My name is Houston Gordon. Today is July the 30th, 2021, and I'm here in Nashville, Tennessee, where it's my privilege to interview Charles Bone. The interview is taking place as a part of the Legal History Project of the Fellows of the Tennessee Bar Foundation. Would you tell us your full name, please?
Charles William Bone.
And where do you live?
I live in Hendersonville, Tennessee.
And how long have you lived in Sumner County?
Since dirt. So I've been there all my life except for law school and college and the Army.
All right, so tell me your birthday.
September the 25th, 1946.
And where were you born?
There's some dispute about that, but I think I was born at St. Thomas Hospital in Nashville. Some people say I was born at home, but let's go with St. Thomas.
All right. And tell me who your parents were.
Well, my parents were William L. Bone and Noakes Moss Bone.
And what was your dad called?
Billy.
And what are your grandkids?
Well, we called him Pa Bone.
All right.
For the last 20 years after my grandchildren were born.
And tell us about your mother's name.
My mother's name is Noakes, and she was known as Ma Bone.
All right. And what about their parents? Tell me about Billy Bone's parents.
Well, Billy Bone's parents were Minnie and Charles Clark Bone, and they lived on the farm in Gallatin where Pa Bone was born and died, in the house where Pa Bone was born and I was born, and where I lived until I was 14.
All right.
They were farm people, primarily. My grandfather, even though he wasn't educated, was chair of the school board in Sumner County for some short period of time, but he died at an early age, and I never knew him.
Well, tell me about the Bone family and that farm. How long has that farm been in the Bone family?
Well, it goes back to the Baker family that settled that area in 1785. So the Baker received a land grant, and then over the years, that property was divided among all of the various heirs, and we ended up with 55 acres.
All right. Now tell me about Ma Bone.
Ma Bone's people were from Smith County. She was actually born in Monaville in Smith County. They moved to Sumner County about 100 years ago, where her parents were sharecroppers in Sumner County, in the area that's now on the lake, on the Cumberland River, and now Old Hickory Lake.
All right. And tell me what Billy Bone did for a living.
Well, Billy Bone never went to college. He graduated from high school, as my mother did, and he had several different jobs before the war, but went to World War II, and when he came home, he became a bookkeeper at the Ford dealership in Gallatin. It was known as Wade Motor Company. And at some point when he was in his 50s, Mr. Wade owned this really small bank in Westmoreland, Tennessee, and was tired of the bank regulators, so he worked it out for my father to be able to borrow the money with another guy and buy control of the bank in Westmoreland, the Farmers and Merchants Bank.
And we'll get into your banking experience starting with that in a little bit, but tell us more about Noakes Bone.
Well, Noakes Bone was the classic housewife. She was 10 years younger than Pa Bone, and she was the classic housewife. Pa Bone's mother, who'd been widowed, lived with us until she died in 1954. So Ma Bone took care of her, and took care of her mother, and took care of all the neighbors, and took care of all the children and grandchildren as long as she was able.
All right. I want you to tell us real quickly, and then we'll move on to something else. But tell us real quickly about who introduced Noakes to Billy.
Well, Pavone was working at the Genesco plant factory in Gallatin right before. Well, they were married in 1940, so right before the war, he was working at the Genesco plant, and one of Mabone's sisters, Catherine Payne, worked there with him, and she came home one night and said, "You're going to have a date with Billy Bone tomorrow night, and don't say anything but yes and get ready."
And how long were they married?
Well, they were married, I guess until his death in 1999, really 2000, right at the beginning of 2000.
All right. And I want to ask you about one other sister of your mother that I knew very well. Tell us about your Aunt Aggie.
Well, Aggie Dyer, she married Ross Dyer, who was a lawyer, and they lived in Halls, Tennessee, down in West Tennessee. He was later he was an executive assistant to Governor Ellington, and then was on the Supreme Court and was Chief Justice of the Tennessee Supreme Court at one point. And now their grandson, Ross Dyer, is on the Court of Criminal Appeals.
Now, tell me, if you would, about your growing up. Did you grow up on the farm?
I grew up on the farm.
What did y'all raise?
Well, we had tobacco and hay and pigs for a very short period of time, and cattle and sheep, and we had. It was a small farm, but it was a real farm, and it was work, and it was quite an undertaking. And my father was working in town a lot of that time, of course, at Wade Motor Company. So, everybody worked on the farm in some form or another, and we had other people who helped as well.
All right, tell us about growing up. Tell me about your childhood, where you went to school.
Well, I went to school in all the public schools in Gallatin, from elementary school to all the way through high school, and I involved in the 4-H club and all the activities, the band, and I wasn't much of an athlete, so I had a lot of other activities and worked as much as I could off the farm, as quick as I could.
I was going to ask you, some of us got allergic to the farm and wanted to do something else. What else did you do?
Well, I told God when I was 12, if he'd get me off the farm, I'd never go back. So I in order to accomplish that, I had to have a job in town that took up my time, and so I spent many years as a soda jerk at Clark's drugstore in Gallatin, kind of starting from 12 or 13, 14 years old, all the way through college, really off and on. So, I was very involved in Clark's drugstore for a long period of time, which, interestingly, we'll come back to that. When I started practicing law, I was, kind of, the back doors were in sight of each other between my law firm and Clark's drugstore. So some people had a hard time getting over the fact that I was no longer a soda jerk and now a lawyer. So we had to work through that with some folks in town.
Before we get to law school, let's talk about college. Where'd you go to college?
I went to Vanderbilt.
And why?
Well, Mr. Wade, who was my father's boss, was the father of Johnny Wade, who was older than me, and he had gone to Vanderbilt. And my father thought, well, if Mr. Wade's son can go to Vanderbilt, you ought to be able to go to Vanderbilt. And so I was fortunate enough to.
And what was your major at
Vanderbilt?
Yes.
Economics.
All right. And how long did you go to Vanderbilt?
Well, I was really there for only 3 years because I went during the summers to finish in 3 years. I failed biology when I was a freshman, and so I had to go to summer school. I wasn't much of a science guy, and I had to go to summer school to make it up. And so when I figured out that I could go to summer school 2 or 3 summers and finish in 3 years, that was kind of the plan that I developed, and finished from September of 1964 as a freshman to August of '67 at Vanderbilt.
But tell me
It was the
about,
class of '68, of course. Yeah.
were there any people that were important to you from your Vanderbilt experience?
Really interesting. From day one, I ended up in a dorm where later my great friend Frank Woods was the head dorm advisor, and all of the members of his staff were law students at Vanderbilt. He was in law school, and so Bob Brandt, later the chancellor here in Nashville, was the laundry agent in the basement of the dorm, and Lionel Barrett, one of Nashville's great criminal lawyers, was on one floor, and then my later partner, George Crawford, was also as a dorm advisor there. So I quickly came under the influence of law students at Vanderbilt, and that kind of changed my life in a major way.
And tell us some of the other people that were there that you.
Well, there were, a lot of people. A lot of great people. Jack Stringham, who's my law partner now, was in our class, and his wife, Ann Ramsey Stringham, was from Gallatin, and she and I grew up from kindergarten through Vanderbilt together. So they've been long time friends. And Doolin Kelly, who's another pretty well-known trial lawyer all over the world, he would say, was in my class, and was also from Gallatin and Gallatin High School. And so we were all there at the same time. And Lee Barfield was in our class. Of course, he's a very famous lawyer, and retired lawyer now, I guess. And so.
But you said you were in the class of 1968. When did you start the law school, and where?
Well, I started. One other person, though, that we have to include in the Vanderbilt group is Jane Ann Woods, who's Jane Ann Owens from Paris, Tennessee, and she and Frank Woods married in May of 1966, and she was a year behind Frank in law school and a year or two ahead of me. So, we've friends all our lives, and all of Frank's life. And Jane Ann is still our great friend and former law partner.
Okay.
So I started the law school with you in August or September of 1967. I think it was really still September then at the time that we started to start the law school in Knoxville at the University of Tennessee.
Why did you go to University of Tennessee, Knoxville?
Well, there were a lot of reasons. Probably the real reason was that there was this woman in my life named Baylor Ann McKay, who was at UT Knoxville. And so I was trying to keep up with her, and decided that was a good way to do that. And I frankly, I wanted I had some, I guess, real interest in practicing law in Tennessee and wanting to know more Tennessee lawyers. And I didn't think if I stayed at Vanderbilt as a law student and my class was a senior at Vanderbilt, that would be the perfect way to do that. So that's, I wanted to meet you. And the only way I could do that was get to Knoxville as fast as I could.
Now, Mr. Bone, this is supposed to be a truthful interview.
Right.
Seriously, tell us about Baylor and when you met Baylor in.
Well, so in 1966, John J. Hooker ran for governor, and Frank Woods and Larry Woods and I were all very involved, and Jane Ann were all very involved in that campaign, along with a lot of other people who've been lifelong friends. And Baylor Ann was from Columbia, and her father was a supporter of John Jay's, and he sent her to Nashville to work in the campaign headquarters. And, so she fell in love with me. I couldn't turn her down. Thank goodness she's not on the interview.
Tell us about the Hooker campaign. Did you work with some people that became lifelong friends again?
Yes, well, a lot of people who became lifelong friends. I really didn't know Larry Woods until the campaign. He'd been he had not gone to Vanderbilt. He'd gone to away to college, and so we were very involved with Frank and Jane Ann. And then, because we were there and involved, I got to really know well people who were a great influence on my life, not just John Jay and Henry Hooker, but Bill Willis in particular, and Jim Neal and John Siegenthaler, and it was quite a who's who of people in my life who were later great influences. And then the students who were there, Hal Hardin was somewhere between the two groups, but Hal and I became friends in 1966 and have been forever and ever. And Keel Hunt was in that campaign before he switched to work for Lamar Alexander later on. So we had Bill Preston Jr., whose father was the chief photographer at the Tennessean, was one of my great friends. And I actually lived with him my first year of law school in Knoxville. And Bill Preston was a journalist and great friend.
And Larry Woods, is he Frank Woods' brother?
Yes, younger brother.
Okay. Now, UT Law School. You just told us you were rooming with Bill Preston, and as I recall, it's down on Clinch Avenue. Is that right? Or
White
Avenue?
White Avenue.
And was Bill in law school, or is he in undergraduate school?
No, he was in undergraduate school, and he later married Candy McCampbell, who they were very involved with the Daily Beacon, the newspaper on campus in Knoxville, and he was still writing as a student journalist for the Tennessean from time to time, and so there a lot of great relationships there.
Now, tell us about law school, when you began and when you got out.
Well, I began in September of 1967. In the spring of 1968, the draft, the reclassification, the exemption for law students was terminated. So all of us had to make a decision in the spring of 1968 about whether we were going to join the JAG as you did, or whether we were going to be drafted, or whether we were going to volunteer, or how we were going to go about our service to the country. And with no real plan. Just at the end of that school year in 1968, the Army Reserves opened up an entirely new unit there close on campus, and about 25 of us from law school went over and signed up and joined the Army Reserves. So that created a situation in the fall quarter of 1968 where we were called up for our 6 months of active duty. So I had to leave law school in that quarter, and then didn't come back until the end of the winter quarter in 1969. So I got behind in terms of graduating within the exact 3 years, and had to finish in the summer of 1970, in August of 1970.
All right. I want you to tell us, what was it that prompted the draft?
Prompted the draft? Well, that was obviously the Vietnam War, and that was, that consumed a major part of the lives of our generation during that period of time. And
there was something else going on from 1964 through, and still going on today. But what happened in that period, if anything, that piqued your interest?
Well, the civil rights movement was, I guess, a parallel issue and major news to as well as the Vietnam War. So there was a lot of engagement about, what your views were going to be on race relations and civil rights and voting and justice and all of those issues that I've been.
And in 1968, 67, 68, and starting even before that, with regard to civil rights, what was your view?
Well, I was very pro-civil rights. One thing that I don't know that I've ever even told you is in the 66 campaign for Hooker for governor, I was asked to drive to Ripley, Tennessee for a meeting of young people for Hooker in Ripley one night, and a young African-American man rode with me to Ripley, and we got to the front door of the restaurant in Ripley, and the proprietor came out and said, "I'm for Hooker, and I want to help any way I can, but this boy can't come in my restaurant. My daughter's in there," and that seemed to make a difference to him. But so, they wouldn't let my co-worker in the campaign in that establishment, which I thought was really
And that's 1966.
That was 1966. Then, of course, at Vanderbilt, we had the Stokely Carmichael appearance in 67, and Bobby Kennedy in 67, and 68, and so it was. This was the war and civil rights were at the forefront of every conversation.
Since the war and civil rights, and obviously you were involved in Hooker's campaign, when the 1968 came around, were you involved in the presidential campaign?
Well, I was to the extent that I could be. We were in Knoxville, of course, and certainly I was very engaged and interested in what was going to happen with the Democratic nomination, and actually had the opportunity to come home and be a part of the appearance of Robert F. Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy at Vanderbilt for the Impact night, and got to be his chauffeur that night to John Siegenthaler's home after his speech. And so So I was very interested in his campaign, and then, of course, a month later, he was assassinated. So you know, as we all know, Nixon was elected in November, barely after beating Hubert Humphrey.
Well, tell us, if you would, what impact did Kennedy's death and what impact did Martin Luther King's death have on you?
Well, those men were real heroes of mine at the time and since then, and I felt like they were speaking from the heart and from the truth, and that they had a pathway to make America a better place to live for all of us. And so I was very engaged and interested and active in all of those various campaigns and activities.
All right. I want to go to the law school experience itself and tell us the highlights of your law school career.
Well, unlike you and others who were really, really serious students, I had a great time, and I really loved law school and the people who were there, and some of the professors that we had, and the most important part of my life during that time was the group of us who lived together in Knoxville, and actually lived on Cortlandt Avenue at one point, where Bernie Bernstein and his family lived in that period of time. And Bernie was one of the great lawyers in Knoxville, but we were renting a home from Steve Avery's brother and sister-in-law, and we weren't the best neighbors in that nice, secluded
And
neighborhood.
who were we that you're talking about?
We were, Houston Gordon, and Roger Kessley, and Steve Avery, and A.B. Culverhouse, and others from time to time. But that was, I guess, the core group that.
Talk about the political leanings of the people who were living in the house.
Well, Roger Kessley's dad was, of course, in Lamar Alexander's cabinet, and was a Republican. A.B. Culverhouse, who was in undergraduate school as a senior then, obviously went on to be Howard Baker's assistant, and worked in his campaign and his office, and then went on with Howard Baker, where A.B. became White House counsel during the part of the Reagan years when Howard was chief of staff. And he's since been, A.B. is a famous friend. He's been, I think he's your first cousin, but he's been a famous friend, and he was ambassador to Australia during the Trump years, and was the chairman of the big law firm O'Melvey and Myers during part of his tenure. So
And what about Steve Avery's politics?
Well, Steve Avery's dad, Steve was from Alamo, Tennessee, and he was, Steve's father was Commissioner of Corrections under Clement and Ellington, Governors Clement and Ellington, and they'd been very involved in Democratic politics.
So would it be true to say that Democrats and Republicans were living together and talking with each other and getting along during those days?
Yeah, we got along pretty well. That's right. So we had great discussions and some arguments, but mostly it was over kind of what we were going to buy at the grocery store, and divide up how we were going to divide up the bill.
And paprika.
Yeah, I think. I'm still don't know whether I know what paprika is, but we had a big fight over whether we were going to spend money on that.
All right. What did Did you like your classes in law school?
I like law school, and I like playing tennis during some classes, and I went to most of the classes and was, yes, I mean, I liked most of them. I wasn't the most sincere, genuine student as some others were, but I was happy to be there and passed and made reasonably good grades. And obviously we were very involved with the National Moot Court team and the other trial advocacy.
Well, tell us about
events.
your experience on the National Moot Court team, how you got on it.
Well, Joe Cook, who was one of the really great professors there for a long, long time, I think selected you and me and Pat Ruth to be on the National Moot Court team, and we did our competition and were relatively successful, and that was a big part of our experience there in law school, I think.
And I believe you got an advocacy award, didn't you?
I did.
Tell us about that.
So my friend Houston Gordon wrote the argument for me, and I gave the argument, and I got the best speaker, and Houston came in second. And I won the 5-volume set of Roscoe Pound on jurisprudence.
Did you ever read the Roscoe Pound on jurisprudence?
No, that wasn't right. That wasn't down my alley exactly. And so we had great professors and a great class and good people, and it was just wonderful. And one of our other great professors was Colonel R. McDonald Gray, who had been in World War II and been a line officer plus been a JAG officer. And during the time when we were not necessarily on the same page with respect to the Vietnam War, I developed a great relationship with him and great respect for him. And actually later, when he passed away, was asked to speak at his memorial service, and that was quite an honor. And then Durwood Jones was the tax teacher, and we got to know each other better on the tennis court than we did in the classroom. But it was, and that we had all kinds of great professors.
Well, and you mentioned Joe Cook earlier. What about you? Did you have an association or any relationship with a professor by the name of Don Payne?
Don Payne, of course, is one of the great Tennessee lions of the bar in Tennessee, and he was a pretty young. I mean, again, in 1969, he was teaching evidence at the law school as a, I guess a adjunct professor, and we really, along with you and Blanchard Toole and others, developed a really close relationship with him. He was somebody who could make evidence at least partially interesting, and became a great friend, and was a really terrific professor, and obviously went on to teach the bar review courses, and was one of the great lawyers in Tennessee, and was president of the bar sometime later in his career. Died at an early age.
But before you went to law school, were you familiar with any lawyers?
Well, only those that I met, the law students that I met at Vanderbilt, and then Thomas Goodall in Gallatin was, went to the First Baptist Church where we went to church, and so I knew Mr. Goodall at the time, and then I served several lawyers at Clark's Drugstore, where they'd come in to drink coffee and tell stories, and occasionally they'd stay much later and drink something else that was in the back room. I'm not sure what it was, but so I got to know a lot of lawyer stories and just kind of on the square in Gallatin.
Well, tell me if you would, did you do any clerking while you were in law school?
Well, yes, I had the good fortune to be selected to work for what was then Baker, Worthington, Crosley, and Stansbury. That was in 1960, I guess the 1967. So we started law school. So I guess in the spring of '68, I got to, all through law school after the first quarter or two, I had the opportunity to work with them and got to be, of course, Bob Crosley, as most lawyers our age know, was kind of the dean of the bar review course at the time and was a great lawyer and really well known. They were a very small firm then, and Don Stansbury and I became really good friends. He was their youngest partner, named partner at the time, and we became friends then. And he lived next door to Howard Baker in Huntsville, Tennessee, and again a Republican who became a great friend and still is a great friend and wonderful lawyer.
Well, now, when did you finish law school?
I finished in August of '70.
And took the bar when?
In February of '71.
Passed the bar when?
Passed the bar in April of '71 and started to work for Thomas Goodall on the square in Gallatin.
Did you interview anywhere else?
Well, the Baker firm wanted me to stay and invited me to consider staying in Knoxville, and then Sid Gilreath and his partners at the time I'd gotten to know them through the 1970 Hooker campaign, and we became great friends and still are, and they invited me to stay in Knoxville, but I wanted to go back to Middle Tennessee, and we were about to get married, and so in the spring of '71, passed the bar, went to work as a lawyer, got married. So all of those things have been now in existence for 50 years.
I was about to say, how long have you and Baylor Ann been married?
50 years. 50.
Just celebrated an anniversary.
Just celebrated our 50th anniversary, June 18th.
And tell us about the kids from that relationship.
Well, Charles Robert Bone was born in '74 and is a lawyer and is now the CEO, the president of Bone McAllister Norton. And
that's the law firm where you're the chairman?
I'm chairman, and he's the president and CEO, and he's lives here in Nashville, has 4 children, and daughter Baylor was born in '78, and she's now Baylor Bone Swindle, and she is a lawyer as well from UT Law School, and is an independent lawyer and lobbyist, and primarily is just does consulting and lobbying work for clients in Nashville or statewide too. But
Charles Robert and Baylor then are interested in politics too?
They've unfortunately picked up some of my habits, some of my good habits, and some of my bad habits. And yes, so Charles Robert, of course, was, when he graduated from high school, rather than go to college, he went to Washington and worked in the Clinton-Gore campaign in 1992, and and then came back and graduated ultimately from Rhodes and Vanderbilt Law School. Baylor, daughter Baylor, worked with Anna Windrow in the administration of Governor Bredesen, and then worked in the Gore for President campaign in 2000, and was kind of in charge of part of the Gore Corps that traveled around. And then when the election night ended in total chaos, she left the next morning at 6 o'clock on a plane to be a part of the Florida recount. So she was got more politics than she wanted, I think, at that time. But she's been very involved and very successful.
And we'll come back to them in a little bit, but you said you went to work with Thomas Goodall.
Yeah, and we're going to come back and let me talk about my grandchildren at some point?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Yes.
So Thomas Goodall was kind of the lawyer's lawyer in the 1970s in Sumner County, and really throughout the state. He became the first disciplinary counsel for the Board of Professional Responsibility on a part-time basis in 1975, when they started that the Board of Professional Responsibility, and then went on to be a circuit judge, and was just the lawyer's lawyer. He was.
Well, tell us what your deal was with him when you went.
Well, I went to work for him in April of 1970, really before April, but officially in April of 1971 for $1,000 a month, and we had he gave me plenty of work to do and plenty of freedom to do it, and ultimately, just within months, changed the name of the firm to Goodall and Bone, which was a big deal back then. Obviously, that anybody that would be an employee would have his name in the firm, and we were, again, right there on the square in Gallatin, and it was quite a.
So the soda jerk became a lawyer.
Right.
Well, tell us, if you would, what kind of cases or what kind of clients you handled when you were with Mr. Goodall.
Yeah. Well, we had, he had done quite a bit of insurance defense work. So he was, I think, kind of the State Farm lawyer in Sumner County, and maybe Macon and Trousdale. And so I helped him with some of those cases. And then we had some pretty significant plaintiff's cases at the time. We had a wrongful death case that, where we collected a $300,000 judgment at the time, was quite a unusual. That was a big amount then, and we, had some products liability cases, but it was, it was real grassroots, on the ground legal work, and
in the pit trial work.
And trial work, and really liked it, and had a good time doing that, and it was a very important part of my life, and it was at that time. I'd only been practicing law a year when some of Mr. Goodall's older friends, who were kind of dissatisfied with the way the county was being run, asked me to run for county attorney of Sumner County. And so I guess in January of '72, on the 5th ballot of the Sumner County Quarterly Court at the time, I was elected by one vote to be the county attorney. And, so we did that for 20 years. I had a lot of help doing that from Bill Wright and George Phillips and others who were very helpful during that period of time.
So the county commissioner, the county quarterly court, elected the county attorney.
Right. That's right.
And
every year.
Every year. So you were reelected then.
Every year. Right.
Tell us, if you would, when you got interested in banking.
Well, my father had become the I guess the CEO, or I don't know whether they even used those titles back then, but of the Farmers and Merchants. This was the Farmers and Merchants Bank of Westmoreland was a $2 million bank when he got involved in 64, 65 while I was at college. And then by the time I came back in 1971, it was 10, 12, 14 million. And it was growing really fast, and they needed capital, and so he asked me to go ahead and come on the board and be a part of the board, and we were trying to help raise additional capital. And so in 1975, we formed the first one bank holding company in Tennessee for a community bank, and that was
first one ever.
First one ever in Tennessee, and that was. You never know, from one day to the next where fate is going to lead you. But as a result of that, I got deeply involved in the banking legal work. And over the next 10 years, we formed 100 one-bank holding companies all over the state and in some other states as well, and became the lawyers for the Independent Bankers Association of Tennessee, and it became that got us really deeply involved in the banking business and the banking legal work.
Well, explain what a one bank holding company is and what it does.
I don't think you've got enough time, but a bank holding company is formed as a parent company to a bank, and a bank cannot borrow money itself to put into what's called capital of the bank, but the holding company can borrow the money and put it down into the bank, and then use the dividends of the bank to pay back the money that it borrows. So it was, and there's some tax advantages for doing that, and it became it's the only thing I've ever done, almost the only thing I've ever done other than adoptions that was just unanimously appreciated and loved. There's no downside to forming a bank holding company of any significance. So we had quite a incredible experience.
And we being who?
Well, it started out in 1975, being me, and in 1976, Vicki Scruggs joined me as a legal assistant, and so we did. After I formed Gallatin Bank Shares in 1975 and got the approval of the bank regulators, a bank in West Tennessee called and said, "Come tell us about what you're doing and why wouldn't we want to do this?" And then the Bank of Goodlettsville called and said, "We think we'd really like to do this." And so Vicki and I were churning out all these papers and applications, and it became a little overwhelming just in terms of kind of the amount of opportunity that was there to do this. So that's when I began trying to decide whether I needed to have an office in Nashville or not.
And did you have an office in Nashville?
Well, in 1978, the day after Labor Day, we formed Bone & Woods, and that was Jane Ann Woods became my partner there. I think at the time, maybe she was, the only kind of woman partner of a man in a law firm in downtown Nashville, which was a big deal at the time, but we didn't really think of it in that context. But then it was also at that time that Sam McAllister and Mike Norton joined us, and that changed my life forever.
Well, I want to back up if I can a little bit, and you mentioned Jane Ann. That's Frank Wood's wife.
Right.
And what was Frank doing during this period of time?
Well, a lot. Frank and I became great friends and partners, and even as early as 1971, Frank and I and another guy bought control of the Bank of Kingston Springs. Right, shortly after I started practicing law later that year. That was, again, a really, really small bank, and right off the exit, I-40 going west out of Nashville. And it was a bank that had lost its FDIC insurance because of the robberies, where the robbers would get right off the interstate and run in the bank and rob the bank, and then get back in the car and head off. And so they were in some form of crisis, and they had when we first went to see them, obviously there was a stove, one of those potbelly stoves in the back room, but there was also a shotgun up against the wall where they were trying to be prepared for the next robbers that came in. So we were able to take control of the Bank of Kingston Springs and help kind of get the insurance back and get that little better organized and grow it. And we later sold that, and we bought some other banks, Frank and I and other people, off and on all the way during the 70s in several different small places, and started a bank in Springfield and started a bank in Huntington. And so we had a lot of work together, Frank and I, and Frank then became the president and CEO of what was United American Bank, later United Southern Bank of Nashville. And so that bank was located in the old Hamilton Bank building, and what later became the Noel Hotel, and then later became an office building. And so our offices were there, and we were the lawyers for that bank and a lot of others all across the state. I mean, in some counties we represented 3 different banks doing bank holding companies. So it was quite a.
I want to talk about one more bank. You mentioned a bank in West Tennessee. Where was that?
Well, in Huntington.
All right. Well, what about, was there another bank in West Tennessee?
Well, then in 1977, that's where you're headed for J.D. Clinton. J.D. Clinton from Brownsville called me and said, I'd like to hire you to help me form a bank holding company in Brighton, Tennessee, which is another really small suburb of Memphis and suburb of Covington. And he said, I'm about to form a partnership and buy this control of this bank, and would you help me? And JD, of course, has become, my great dear friend. We've done business together now for 50 years, or almost 50 years. And it's been a great personal friend and a wonderful client.
Okay, I'm going to ask you one more thing about banking right now, but and then we'll do one question about politics during the 1970s, and then we'll take a break.
Okay.
In the banking business, and this may get into early 80s, but were there problems in the banking industry in Tennessee?
Sure. Well, the butcher banks is what you're referring to there. Jake and C.H. Butcher were brothers in East Tennessee who bought a lot of banks and did a lot of big deals. Frank and I were doing little deals. The Butchers were doing big deals, and Jake Butcher, of course, had run for governor and was, really interested in politics for all those years. And they ended up with doing some really stupid things that were criminal in nature in terms of the way they did their loans and ownership. And so that created a real crisis in Tennessee banking in 1983, really, all the way through the rest of the decade. There were, I'm not sure exactly, but I think my memory would say that somewhere between 15 and 20 banks failed during that period of time.
And then I want to ask you a question about politics. In 1976, did you get involved in anybody's campaign?
Yeah, one Saturday morning in 1976, this guy walks in my law office on Saturday morning, was open, and said, "Hi, I'm Al Gore. I'm running for Congress, and I want you to help me, and I want you and Johnny Hayes to help me in Sumner County and be involved in my campaign." And so that was kind of the beginning of what has been a long relationship. And Johnny Hayes was in the insurance business at the time in Sumner County, and he and I had become great friends. And so we were again friends for many, many years till he passed away in 2008. But so we got involved, and it was Al, and he was elected to Congress in 1976 in a field of several candidates. I mean, it was a very, very close race, but that enabled him to go to Congress, and then of course he went to the Senate in '84 and so forth. So
in that campaign, did you run into some more friends that became friends for life?
Yes, and so we have a lot of great friends from that campaign. Foremost on that list would be John T. Bobo, the lawyer in Shelbyville, who's been our friend since then, and also John Maddox from Cookville, whose father had been Jared Maddox, who was Lieutenant Governor of Tennessee, and John Maddox and John T. Bobo were behind us in law school by a year or 18 months, and so we all got to be friends working on the Gore campaign, and John Maddox later, after Gore was elected, went to work in his as a congressional aide, and then went on to become a circuit judge. He's now retired, but and then the newspaper man from Lebanon was Sam Hatcher, who again has been my great friend for all these years since then, and he was publisher of the local newspaper in Lebanon at the time, and so we've all had a great friendship over all these years.
What is it about a campaign or working for somebody trying to get them elected that forges friendships, if anything?
Well, what I've always said is political campaigns bring out the best and the worst in people. And, the best is when you have an opportunity to really get to know people like Hal Hardin, 66, or Frank Woods, or Jane Ann, or on and on and on. And like in the Gore campaign, when you work really hard for something that you believe in, there's a bond that really makes a difference in terms of how you feel about people and how you keep up with people. And a lot of us have been friends for many, many years. Keel Hunt, I didn't mention him just a second ago, but Keel and I have been friends since 1966, and he's one of the really great guys in Nashville.
Let's take a break. We were talking about your banking practice, and we just ended with the butcher debacle. And I want to pick up there and ask you, how did that affect your banking and your practice?
Well, it was, the entire debacle impacted every part of banking in Tennessee, kind of all across the state in many, many ways. You know, as I mentioned, Frank and I own some parts of smaller banks in Middle Tennessee primarily, and you know, the valuation of all those banks went down and were impacted in terms of just value. And so we made the decision to sell those banks to different people, you know, in different cities, and lost some money in terms of doing that. So, you know, it was a matter of kind of, you know, hitching up our belt and going back to work. And, you know, that was one interesting piece of my life where, you know, there were some genuine losses there, and where I came to appreciate in spades the advice my father had given me. Again, an uneducated man with only a high school degree. He always said to me, if you'll get your law degree, you can always find a job. You can always hang out your shingle if you need to and make a living. And as a person who lived through the Depression and the impact of the Depression on everybody in America or the world, that was really important to him, that there be a fallback position where you could always make a living. So, you know, we were very busy at the time in terms of our legal work and the work we did. And what we have said since then, in more context than ever, is, you know, we've had the opportunity to do everything to a bank you can do to a bank. You know, we've started them. We've helped them during the process where they were closed by the regulators and represented the banks and their board of directors. We've helped them merge. We've helped them buy. We've helped them sell. So it's been a terrific opportunity for all these years to be a bank lawyer, and we're doing it today. I mean, we have a lot of bank work that's very, very busy in our firm today.
Now, I want to go back then to representing banks. And did you have an opportunity to represent any banks up in East Tennessee with which Mr. Stansberry and Mr. Baker?
Sure. So that was, we had an opportunity to, to basically travel the state and several other states in that practice. What you're referring to is that Senator Baker and Don Stansberry and 3 or 4 others, prominent East Tennesseans, bought a bank in the early 80s, and they didn't have in their law firm, of course they knew me, but they didn't have in their law firm anybody who knew anything about bank regulatory work. So they asked me to represent them, which was a great honor, of course, to help them acquire a bank in East Tennessee and put it in a bank holding company, and they owned it for several years and then sold it to another buyer.
All right, and what did that do with regard to your practice?
Well, again, we can go county by county, place by place, where there's great friends, great bankers. And what we have said for many years, and it's not quite as true now, but for many years, what we said behind every client we had was a bank story, a banker who said, Bone helped us do this work for our bank, and if you need work with your business, call Bone, or your county needs work, call Bone. And if you want to sell your hospital, as the Bedford County did called Bone. And so, it's just been an incredible experience to be in that posture where throughout the state we had all these great friends, and they were pleased with what we'd done for them and how we'd taken care of them, and they keep coming back.
Well, and with regard to, now we've talked about politics and we've talked about banking. I want to talk a little bit more about politics and banking.
Okay.
How did you end up at Baker Worthington?
Well, Baker Worthington had an office here in Nashville, and they, shortly after the experience where I helped the senior partners buy that bank, they came back to me. We had, this was in 86, 87, 88. Again, Don Stansberry was the primary person. Worthington was the managing partner, but Don was really my friend and closest associate there. And he and Bob Worthington called and said, you've got, I don't know, we had 14 lawyers maybe at the time in our firm, and said, we'd like for you to join Baker, Worthington, Crosley, Stansberry, and Wolf. My children had to practice for a long time, remembering all those names at the time. And they came and said, we'd like for you to help be a part of the management of the firm and bring your lawyers and help us grow Baker Worthington. And so in 1989, January the 1st, 89, we became a part of the Baker Worthington firm.
And the Wolf at the end, who is that?
Well, that's, help me with his first name. Lou Wolf was a great trial lawyer, and he had joined them by then. I didn't really know him before we began our discussions about joining Baker Worthington, but he had joined them to do basically trial defense work, primarily for for Ford Motor Company or Chrysler or other major companies kind of all over the United States. So he had built a team of lawyers who were, very successful. Stansberry was a part of that to some degree, but Stansberry had so many other clients he couldn't be a full-time trial lawyer.
Well, tell us what it's like to merge law firms.
Well, having had a lot of experience with that, I'd say it's like any other merger that we've been a part of for our clients. You got to figure out, these people you think you can work with, that you can live with every day, that you can get along with, that you have the same goals and aspirations for, and then then with lawyers, obviously, and everybody else. I mean, it's not just law firms. It's about the money. Can they make the money work and make that right? We were at a point in 1988 with our lawyers where, and I don't want this to sound immodest, but where we had 12 or 14 lawyers at the time, and 75% of the business was being originated by me, and I didn't think that was healthy. And I felt like we needed a broader platform. So Baker Worthington made that easy, in terms of saying, you come, you'll be a senior partner, yada, 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 and, you make more money, yada, 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 and everybody will be happy. So we did that from the beginning in 89.
And how long did you stay with Baker Worthington?
We stayed until 90, through the end of 93, and White Tarrant Combs from Louisville came knocking on our door and said, we really want to expand in Tennessee, and we want you and whomever you want to bring with you to be the leaders of the movement to, for us to become as big a firm in Tennessee as we are in Kentucky. They had a very wonderful firm, in Kentucky, and they had already merged in Harris Gilbert's firm, Gilbert and Milam. So they had about 10 or 12 or 14 lawyers in Nashville. So they said, you come and be a part of what we're doing and help us expand in Tennessee. And we really want your banking practice as a part of what we're doing, because we do a lot of that kind of work in Kentucky. So beginning in '94, I had the opportunity to practice law with Harris Gilbert, who, again, is one of my heroes and a real lion of the bar in so many ways. So we did that beginning in '94, and got to go to the Kentucky Derby and be a part of a lot of interesting parts as far as that's concerned.
All right, so you took your banking work with you, and you've
Right.
done over 100 holding companies. And tell us what other stuff you've done with regard to banking.
Well, at one point, I have to stop there and say, we didn't spend much time talking about Mike Norton or Sam McAllister, who joined me and Jane Ann in 1978. Again, Mike passed away in 2015 after we'd worked together for 35 years. And Mac and I are still law partners. And no person, I mean, of course, all of these people have blessed my life, but you couldn't ask for any better partners and friends and lawyers than McAllister and Norton. So, I've told many people over the years, McAllister, I've never heard him raise his voice. I've never heard him curse. I've never heard him slam a door, which you can't say that about me. And he and Mike are kind of the people who kept the plane in the air and made things work. And we were best friends and partners for all these years.
And what was Norton's expertise?
Well, let me start with Mac. McAllister built a real expertise in doing day-to-day work for banks in terms of loan documents, real estate, bankruptcy, the guts of a bank in terms of what they need every day. Mike joined me, and in terms of the practice, the regulatory work, the securities work, the work that the banks needed to grow and by other banks or other branches. And a good example of that, I mean, I'm not going to talk about all our clients, but the Barkers in East Tennessee, Southeast Tennessee, the Barkers and they're in Dunlap. They started in Dunlap as the Citizens Tri-County Bank down there. Tommy Austin, the great lawyer up on the mountain there, was their partner, and they were 10 or 12 or $15 million, and now they're $1 billion bank, and they've been great friends and clients, and Mike Norton was their lawyer. Trace Blankenship is now their lawyer. And we've been really blessed to, have clients like that. And we only kept those clients, because of Mac and Mike and Trace and others who've been there every time the bankers have called to say, can you make this happen for us?
What? Trace who?
Trace Blankenship, I'm sorry.
All right. Tell when you went to White Tarrant, did Mac and Mike Norton go with you?
Everywhere I went, they went with me. I wouldn't go without them. And they, whether they really thought it was a good idea or not, if they'd let me provide some leadership there. And they occasionally they put their foot down, but maybe not as often as they should have.
Well, as you were talking,
They put their foot. Really wanted to buy an airplane, and they said no, we're not going to buy an airplane. So we can rent an airplane, but we're not going to buy an airplane. So we laughed about that for a long time.
On representing the bankers, did you represent them personally too?
Oh yeah, and so and that's and you have to obviously be vigilant about conflicts in terms of who you're representing in any kind of transaction. But the most prominent individual banker that we have represented is J.D. Clinton, who's been the chairman and owner of now what's called InSouth Bank, or the primary owner of InSouth Bank with his family, that's headquartered in Brownsville and has branches all over West Tennessee. But JD had some interest in maybe some things beyond banking, and we've been involved in a lot of different things there. So.
Well, did one of them have to do with the television?
Yeah, so one night I was standing in his kitchen in Brownsville. He was cooking our dinner. He's a great cook. And he said, let's find something else that, this is in 92. Let's find something else that we might want to get involved in other than banking. And I said, well, Frank Woods and I have been looking at 3 or 4 different opportunities, and let me tell you what those are. And I think the third one on the list that night was a company called Shop at Home in Knoxville, Tennessee. And JD said, "Boy, well, that sounds interesting." And so he said, "Well, let's go up there and check on that." So thankfully, he had an airplane, so we could go to Knoxville, and they were broke and about to close down, about to fail. They'd started, as backyard dish people in Newport, and had moved to Knoxville. And it's just one of those great stories where Shop at Home was a knockoff of what people will know today as Home Shopping Network, HSN, and QVC were and are the leading companies in that industry, where they sell stuff over the air on TV. So we put together a group to buy control of Shop at Home and restore their I guess credit worthiness, so that we could grow that company. So that was great experience. From 93 to 2005, and we bought control of Shop at Home. We made it a public company on NASDAQ. We moved the headquarters to Nashville. We had over $300 million in sales. At one time, we bought 7 different television stations all around the country during that period of time, and so it was a race where we were trying to make that into a viable company that would be, and actually it was third kind of in the industry, but it was way behind Home Shopping Network and QVC. But it was a great business, and our sports memorabilia that they sold overnight was I guess was a part of hawkers, I guess is what I'd call them, who were selling the sports memorabilia like autographed helmets or autographed baseballs or baseball cards or football cards. They were so aggressive and so entertaining that they were actually picked up and ridiculed on Saturday Night Live a couple of times because they were so crazy, and it was just a terrific experience. It all wasn't all perfect. We had a lot of different issues, a lot of counterfeit issues with sports memorabilia, and we ended up in a lot of litigation kind of all over the country at a lot of different places. But we ended up making money and doing well and buying those TV stations and from San Francisco to Boston to so forth, and and then we sold the company to Scripps out of Cincinnati that already owned already owned companies in Knoxville, and I had other channels for their company. So that was quite a ride.
Well, did your firm take it public?
Yeah. So we did all of that on NASDAQ. Mike Norton, was the leader of that. We worked with investment bankers in a lot of different places, but primarily in Friedman, Billings, Ramsey, and in Washington or Alexandria, and so we were on a real roll. That was
I want to go back to
time.
politics for a minute.
Okay.
In 1968, do you remember the Albert Gore Sr. race for the Senate?
That was actually 1970,
Okay.
where he got beat by Bill Brock.
Okay.
Right.
Were you involved in that?
Barely. I was really on the hook. Hooker was that year. Hooker was running for governor against Governor Dunn, and Brock was running against Albert Gore Sr. And so it was a combined ticket. But I was still in Knoxville trying to get ready for the bar exam, and I was involved in the Hooker side of that of that campaign. And of course, both Winfield Dunn and Bill Brock won that year.
Then you were involved in Al Gore Jr.'s congressional race you talked about. Were you involved in his first Senate race?
Yes, in 1984, he ran for the Senate against our friend Victor Ashe, who was the mayor of Knoxville at the time. And of course, we won that one pretty handily.
And then when he ran again?
Well, so
he ran for president.
He ran for president in 1987 for the 1988 nomination. And so in 1987, we cranked up nationwide campaign with people all over the country who were great friends, and were trying to, at the time there was a lot of people running for president that year. So Gore didn't make the final cut, and withdrew in '88, and then he was reelected to the Senate in 1990.
And then in 1992, what happened?
Well, then in '92, our family was on vacation in Sea Island, Georgia, and all of a sudden, Bill Clinton called Al Gore and said, "I want you to be my vice presidential running mate." And we packed up and went to New York, where Charles Robert and I did to the Democratic convention in '92. You know, where again Johnny Hayes was kind of involved full time, and so we were working, you know, with Hayes and a lot of other people in the '92 campaign, ending up in Little Rock in November for the when Clinton and Gore were elected in November of '92, and then the inauguration in January of '93. So quite a ride.
You mentioned a name earlier about running against Gore, and that was Victor Ashe. Is that correct? Who became the mayor of Knoxville and an ambassador. But tell the folks who are watching this interview how you knew Victor Ashe.
Well, Victor was in our class in law school when we started in 1967, and in 1968 he was elected to the legislature along with another classmate of ours, Dick Krieg, and so they couldn't go every quarter to law school, so they were, you know, it took them a while. I don't know whether Victor ever graduated or not, but I guess he did. And Dick, of course, has been a great lawyer in Knoxville now for many years. He learned pretty quickly that he just didn't want to be a part of the political scene in Nashville, but Victor loved it, and he was right in the middle of all of it. And you want me to tell the story about going to dinner at Victor's house? So when we were all beginning law school, Victor was from a very wealthy family in Knoxville that lived out on Kingston Pike, and they had a lot of money and big house and all the trappings. And so he invited several of us from our class to dinner, and they had a houseboy who served dinner, and so but you didn't see the houseboy until he came through the door, and we didn't know exactly when he was coming through the door, and we later learned that Victor had a button under his foot where he sat at the head of the table, where he pushed that button and the houseboy would come and the waiter would come and bring food or whatever. And so this, all of us except Victor were from the country. Houston was from Covington, Steve Avery was from Alamo, I was from Gallatin, and I think there were a couple of others. Victor even had finger bowls by the table, so which none of us had ever seen. So I was kind of trying to wait until somebody told me exactly what that was. But Steve Avery picked up the bowl and drank a drink out of it, and so again, so we've laughed about that for 50 years. But that's that was country boys come to town and meet people like Victor and have great experiences.
So we had Roger Kessley, Dick Krieg, and Victor Ashe, all of whom were Republicans.
Right.
And we had Steve Avery and myself and you, and let me add AB to that group, who was a Republican. But the other three of us were.
Well, and then there was Blanchard Toole. Who was, he was kind of half Democrat, but his father had been in the legislature as a Democrat from Memphis. And then there was Herb Monsieur, and I don't know if anybody's ever figured out who Herb Monsieur, what political party he would be a part of, if any.
But That group became friends,
Right.
and they've those
Great friends
friendships
forever. Great friends forever.
Tell us, if you would, you talked about being recruited by White, Tarrant, and Combs, and you stayed there for how long?
Too long. We stayed there from 94 until November of 2001.
And in general terms, tell us why you're no longer there, why you left.
Well, White had great lawyers, a great firm. They thought they wanted to be as big in Tennessee as they were in Kentucky, but the cultures just didn't match, and they had certain management styles and issues that I just couldn't agree with, and it kind of all came to a head in 2001 after 9/11, where they were determined that they were going to terminate an associate or two that we just hired because they thought that was the right economic thing for them to do, which it was, but I just didn't believe that people ought to be treated that way. And so I expressed my disagreement about that pretty forcefully, let's put it that way. And they finally said, well, if you feel that strongly, maybe you ought to just leave. And I did.
Which brings us to where you are now. Starting in 2002, right after you left there, what did you do?
Well, we took a temporary space, and not knowing exactly how all this was going to work out.
Who's we?
Well, it was me, and then Stacy Garrett, now Koju, came to me and said, look, I'm going with you, whether you can pay me or not. I want to be a part of what you're doing. And so Stacy and I started Bone Law January 1, 2002, or January 2, 2002. And then shortly thereafter, over the next few months, 10 other lawyers came, Vicky Scruggs came, we grew the firm in the first year to where we had 10 lawyers, and brought all of our business that we had at White. So that worked out really well, because we had a very specific kind of plan that we felt was important as far as the way we wanted to practice law.
Okay, I want to talk about the plan in just a minute, how it's different. But I want to ask you first, did Sam McAllister come with you?
Oh, yeah.
Did Mike Norton come?
Oh, yeah.
Who else came with you in that group?
Well, you can kind of go down the hall here. Trace Blankenship came, and Sherry Jacobs came, and Paz Haynes came, and I'll leave somebody out who's really important, but we, again, we had a core team who wanted to work together and who believed kind of in the same ideals that we all believed in. And so James Crumlin, for example, came and joined us immediately. White had not wanted to hire him. He was at another firm, and we wanted to include him. And so Stacy, most people know her well, but is African American, and she had been to Duke and Tulane Law School and worked for Harold Ford, and had joined us in the late 90s. And she basically came and said, I'm not going to stay here, and I'm willing to risk my financial future if I can just come work with you. And of course, that's all worked out pretty well.
Well, you mentioned that Stacy was African American. Obviously, she's a she, so it's a woman that came with you. And then you mentioned the names, and they're a diverse group, aren't they?
Yeah, and so that was part of our goal, was to say we want to have the most racially diverse, gender diverse firm that we can possibly have, because that's what we believe in. And so I'm not sure exactly when Ann Martin came with us, but early on, Ann Martin, who's now the chancellor, came with us. Stephen Zrolick, who had left Wyatt and gone to Waller, came with us, just several months after we got started. And so, all these people, James Crumlin's African American, Paz Haynes, of course, and so we've been very pleased with what we've been able to accomplish here.
How many lawyers do you have now?
We have 44, I think, now.
And tell how diverse they are, not only with race, but otherwise.
Well, I'm not sure I have the exact numbers, but let's just say that we have a new African American lawyer starting Monday from the University of Tennessee College of Law, who's a native of Ghana, who came here to college and law school, and she's African American. So she'll be here Monday. And I'd say, again, Andrea Perry's here, has been here many years now, and so we have I'd say out of our, let's just say 40 full-time lawyers, we've got some part-time lawyers, probably somewhere real close to 10 of those are African American or otherwise, and or some other racial diversity. And then I don't know how many of them are women. I mean, we don't keep a count of how, I mean, we can go count them, but I haven't counted.
I want to ask you about the difference in structure of Bone, McAllister, Norton, and the other law firms with which you have been associated.
Well, one of the things that I felt really strongly about after being with the other larger firms was, and the larger firms have some reasons why they have to have more rules and more discipline. We wanted to be in a place where we were all treated the same. So what we said to all the lawyers who came, there's not going to be any senior partner, junior partner, senior associate, junior associate. We're all going to be members. We're all going to be members of the PLLC that we formed, which was pretty radical. And we're going to give every lawyer total financial transparency. So you know exactly what everybody else makes. You know exactly how much business they bring in. You know what kind of business they do, how many hours they bill, and we found that to be pretty radical. But what I had learned at these other firms was, if you don't tell somebody if you don't tell a lawyer the answer to the question, how much do I make compared to the person sitting next to me, they're going to assume the worst. And that creates a culture that's just has some bad feelings about it. And they're going to go home, and their husband or their wife is going to say, well, how much do you make compared to the guy, woman that sits next to you? And they're going to say, well, we don't know the answer to that. Well, how come they get to go home at 5 o'clock and you stay till 8 o'clock? So, we've just tried to have complete transparency, and that's worked out really well for us. And we treat all of our kind of everybody that we have with, what we hope is equal respect across the board, no matter what job they're in here, and that's worked out, worked out really well. And we've said, we want everybody to be involved in the community and have a commitment to civic work, and so that's all of that's worked out really well for us.
Well, talk about the fun stuff y'all do.
Well, so
And I'm not talking
one
about
of the
legal
other
work.
one of the other firms had frowned on our Halloween costume contest that we have every Halloween, at noon, where everybody dresses up, and we bring in judges from all walks, and some from the Court of Appeals, some from the courthouse, to judge the best costume, or the best group, or the best duo. So that's been a lot of fun for us. We have what we call the BMN band, where we where we've sent out, where they've done a couple of songs, video performances, where they that was our Christmas card, where they won't let me join the band or sing, but we have a lot of people who are really good at that. And so, obviously not in fun area, we've just added our soft serve ice cream machine, where we have soft serve ice cream occasionally, not on an absolute regular basis, but a couple of times a month. So, and obviously the big event that we do every year is our MLK Day breakfast.
Right. Explain what MLK is, what that means.
Well, Martin Luther King Day is the third Monday in January, and we started in 2002. It was just me and Stacy and a half a dozen others sitting around a table, saying, we're not going to work. This is going to be a holiday, but we want to come together, and we want to acknowledge and appreciate and identify with the causes that Dr. King advocated. I'm sorry, I lost my voice a minute there. And so we've been great advocates of that. And so we've now done 20 of those, I guess. And, it's grown, without our real intention, it's grown from being a very small, just internal event to other people coming. And now we've had as many as 800 or 900 for breakfast on MLK Day. And we've had great speakers from civil rights heroes speak at our MLK breakfast, and that's been a very meaningful part of what we've done as a law firm.
Now, this, among the speakers, just name two or three.
Well, Andrew Young, C.T. Vivian, Bernard Lafayette, Mike Cody, John Siegenthaler, George Barrett. I can go. I wasn't prepared to go down the list completely, and I'm sure I've left off something. Diane Nash. So we've had the real pioneers. Rip Patton is our favorite local speaker, singer, helper in so many ways, and he was one of the Freedom Riders, in 1961, and he's he's our really, really good friend and soul brother. So
I want to ask you, if you would, to talk about the importance, if any, of all of your political affiliations, not your friendship, but your political affiliations have been Democrats. Why is that important to you?
Well, first of all, so that this doesn't sound immodest, when I started in politics as a teenager, there weren't any Republicans in Tennessee. It was, I was a Democrat because everybody was a Democrat. But once I began to consider the issues and the what the Democratic Party stood for most of these years, it was pretty clear to me that I was aligned with the Democratic Party from a philosophical standpoint, a faith-based standpoint, and a practical standpoint. And there are not many of us left, but I'm what they call a yellow dog Democrat. And it's, I don't necessarily agree with everything the Democratic Party does all the time, or some of what the Democrats might advocate for. But that's nobody in our society today is 100% sold on everything. But I've always supported the Democrats, and obviously because of my relationship with Gore and his campaigns over a 30-year period of time, that was I've been all in and tried to help every way I could for most of the Democrats who've run for office, and still do and still will going forward.
I want to talk to you about a couple of things that I know that are important to you, and that one of them is pro bono work. How many of your lawyers at Bone McAllister do pro bono work?
I don't really know. I don't have a head count in terms of how many do pro bono work, but I would say most of our lawyers do some kind of pro bono work every year and participate in the Bar Association programs, that are very organized. And then, I think, when you step back and say, so what does that really mean? It really means, are you helping people for nothing? And, and I think most lawyers help people for nothing pretty regularly. And sometimes they help people for nothing when they don't intend to, when they should have been paid. But there are so many dramatic needs that people have that all of us, I think, have some obligation to be a part of the pro bono work, whether it's an organized program by the bar or helping through the legal aid, or, there's so many different ways to contribute there. A lot of churches have lawyers meet with their church members on a pro bono basis and work through those types of things. A lot of community activities are, really include a lot of lawyers who are working for nothing, trying to help people with the programs that they have in place. So we feel really strongly about that. And, again, we don't make people report in on, what they do or how much they do. We just have a pretty general expectation that most people here are gonna help any way they can.
Right. I want to talk a little bit about family. I want to talk about the children and your grandchildren.
Yeah, let's talk about the grandchildren.
Well, you've talked about Charles Robert, and tell us your daughter-in-law's name?
Sasha.
And Sasha and Charles Robert have how many children?
They have 4.
And what do those children, how old are they and what are they doing?
So Margaret is 20, and she'll be in her 2nd year at Dartmouth this fall. And Carlin will be a senior in high school this year and off to college next year. Simmons is in the 8th grade and is a real athlete, and Carlin is a cheerleader and on these organized travel cheer teams. Simmons is an athlete and on travel teams for soccer or lacrosse and dive and anything else she can fit in. So Brady, then Charles Robert the fourth. Charles Robert's 4th is Henry Bone, who will be in the 6th grade this year, and he's into a lot of activities. He's gaming right now. Wherever he is, he's like most 5th graders or 6th graders, 7th graders there.
And what about Baylor? Who is she married to?
Baylor's married to Ryan Swindle, and they live here in Nashville. And Ryan is also a lobbyist and a native of Sparta, and we've been blessed by our daughter-in-law and our son-in-law. And the Swindles have 2 children. Brady will be in the 7th grade, and he's into everything 7th graders into, especially baseball. And Jane, who's our youngest grandchild, will be in the 5th grade this year, and she's a basketball player. Like
well, her mother was a basketball player too.
My mother was a real basketball player. Jane's going to have a little better size, I think, to help her be a better basketball player.
I believe, if I remember right, wasn't Baylor the Miss Basketball in this area?
Oh yeah, she had all kinds of. She was quite a star, and as we laugh about her jersey being on the gym wall at Good Pasture High School, and she doesn't let us forget.
All right, I want to tie some things together now. You mentioned 3 words that I want you to elaborate on, and that is family, and faith, and values. How do those impact what you do every day as a lawyer?
Well, they are family and faith and values, friends are so interwoven for me that I can't really separate that. I reach back to, childhood, at the Baptist Church in Gallatin, where, my parents were very active members, and, the faith that they taught me and that I have continued to believe really is interwoven with all of my values today. I'm no longer a quote Baptist, but I am a Christian, so we have some faith values that pretty well match what we do all day, every day, or what we try to do all day, every day. And, and that's help other people and help people who need help, and be fair and honest with everybody we deal with. And so, those things, I'm proud of my children because they live those same values, and they are teaching them those values to my grandchildren as well, and I'm very thankful for that. And that's, that comes down, several generations. I was the first person in our family to go to college, and I've come to realize what a big deal that is. And and what a responsibility it is. So, you know, the other person who in my life who lived those values and was a great example was my sister, Lucy, who, you know, died from cancer when she was 48 years old and left her 4 children, you know, to grow up without their mother, and her grandchildren without their grandmother. But she's married to a wonderful man, you know, Rick Orgain, and they've done remarkably well, and they have those same values that you know that again Lucy and I were taught on the farm in Gallatin.
I'm going to circle back around to the last question, but I want to, in the middle, I
want to talk about 2 or 3 clients that are really important.
I'm about to talk about those.
Okay. I don't want to.
All right. We were talking about pro bono a little while ago, and I want you to tell the people who are watching this and listening to you about a young woman by the name of Centoya Brown.
Well, you know, again, that's relationship based. So in 2010, Judge Patsy Cottrell, who is a great friend of mine, you know, she was on the Court of Appeals at the time. She'd been married to Ross Alderman, who had died a year or 2 earlier in a tragic accident. And Patsy and I had practiced law together and been great friends, and then she went on to be on the Court of Appeals. But she called one day and said, I want you to go Saturday to the Green Hills Theater and see this documentary that's going to be shown on the life of Centoya Brown. And, you know, I did. And that obviously had a unbelievable impact on me over the next 10 years, on you, Houston Gordon, and on a lot of us. And because what I saw in that documentary was a tragic story of a young girl, a child, who at age 16 killed a man who had picked her up for sex. And she had, for no need to get deep into the facts, but he had taken her to his house, and she took the gun that this guy she was living with, her pimp, whose name was Cutthroat, and she killed Johnny Allen was the guy's name. And so she had been tried and found guilty and was sentenced to life imprisonment, where she could not be paroled for at least 51 years. And I just didn't think that was right, and I thought the system just surely can't be this way. And so I called my best friend and best lawyer I know, Houston Gordon, and said, will you help me represent Centoya, and will you look at this documentary and get involved in this? And then over the next 10 years, you and I solicited the help of another 15 lawyers who all worked pro bono on various parts of Centoya's case, trying to have some court somewhere acknowledge that this was wrong, that this was unconstitutional. And we argued that in our post-conviction relief in Davidson County. We ordered in the Court of Appeals, and the Supreme Court, and the U.S. District Court, and the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, and we were headed for a decision there when Governor Haslam heard the story and made the decision to grant her clemency in January of 2019, right before he left office. So a long story. She's got a whole book about her life experience and how that all unfolded, and she's become just the most successful writer, author, speaker, person that we could ever hope for. And
she just finished speaking to the law school at Georgetown.
She's speaking to the law school at Georgetown maybe this week or next. As she's the keynote speaker on juvenile justice.
Well, you mentioned other clients. I want to mention one you were involved in it. And let me ask you this, is doing criminal work or post-conviction relief, that sort of thing, the kind of thing you do every day?
I've never done any of that anywhere, anytime, and that's the reason I called you. And then we called 15 other lawyers to get involved and help us, and most prominently Ed Yarborough, who helped us in our clemency application and our plea to Governor Haslam right before he left office. And I hate to say most prominently, but when at the end, speaking to Governor Haslam, it was you and Ed and myself. And that I hate to leave out the other 14 or 15 lawyers who helped us on this without any expectation of being named in a film or being thought of. But Kathy Simbach, for example, who works at the juvenile court in Nashville, has been and is Centoya's friend since the very first day she was arrested. And, and you just go on to, so many more. Lyle Reed, the former Supreme Court Chief Justice of Tennessee. And, if I start naming them, I'm going to leave people out. So I would just say I think the last count, there were 17 of us who worked on her behalf on some part of the legal work.
I want to flip to California and tell about this case that I know about, but these folks don't know about in California.
Well, we in 2014, we had one of our clients come to us and say, I don't know what the story is about this case, but my second cousin has died in Big Bear Lake, California. And now all of a sudden, his best friend has come forward with the will, and it sounds really fishy. So we got involved in that estate in California. We actually, interestingly, associated in California a young lawyer by the name of Theo Emerson, who is the son of Alamo, Tennessee lawyer Jim Emerson, who's been our friend for many, many, many years. And so Theo and his firm and our firm worked together over 5 years to prove that this will that had been brought forward was a forgery. And Sam Jackson, I have to give him credit. He was the person who noticed as we were coming down to the real conclusion that the J made by the deceased was just like the J made by the culprit who had forged the will. And so we did some handwriting experts and took some depositions and, did some mediation. And this was, a $50 million estate for a guy who had no children, no parents, no family whatsoever, except our client and an aunt that we found and made friends with and put their pleas together in front of the court in San Bernardino, California. So we spent a long 5 years working on that, but ended up with a very successful outcome that was very important to our law firm and to me and to our client, especially our client and his cousins and their children have all benefited from that greatly.
Any other client you want to talk about?
Well, the only other one that I feel that I just have to, because I work for them all day, not all day, but I work for them every day, is the Tennessee Municipal Bond Fund, which again is a little different from me, but the Tennessee Municipal Bond Fund was started by my friend Bone Sievers back in the late 80s, and we began as their counsel, I don't know now, 15 years ago when Ogden Stokes retired. And so we've been, they issue bonds or loans for cities and counties all across the state. And they've been a great benefit to a lot of the counties and cities and have financed a lot of major opportunities for those cities and counties. And we've been the tax and general counsel for them for all these years. So that's been a great client for us. So we've had a lot of great clients. And one thing we counted at one point, and as we were thinking about why this is such a statewide practice, and we learned that we had represented clients in 90 of the 95 counties in Tennessee. And that's pretty unusual, but pretty telling about the kind of work that we do. We do a lot of, we do everything now because we've got 40 lawyers who know how to do everything. But I wanted to mention the bond fund in particular.
Is there any other question that you wanted me to ask before I ask you the last?
Probably, you've probably done really well. So we'll if there's anything else, we'll do an addendum some way later on by FaceTime or something.
I want to ask you, we've talked about family, we've talked about your faith, we've talked about your practice, we've talked about what's important to you. As you look back over the last 50 years of practice, or almost 50 years of practice, what is it that you would like your children's children to remember about you?
Well, that's so hard to define, but I feel so enormously blessed by the opportunities that I've had. And, those are, I can't identify those as anything other than just God-given opportunities where I've been put in the right place at the right time to try to do the right thing. And, again, I connect that to my family and to my faith. And the one thing you haven't asked me about that I'm really disappointed that you've overlooked is the fact that I have run 60 half marathons, and I want to make sure I get that in the record because that is.
You're right. I skipped over it and didn't mean to.
That's an incredible accomplishment for somebody who had no athletic abilities whatsoever. And I want to. That's the only thing I want to be immodest about, to say that's been another blessing that's helped me with my health, and it's a discipline that my children have continued. Because health and fitness has been very important to us and to them, and I hope will be to my grandchildren as well. So, in Luke, where Jesus is asked what's the greatest commandment, and he says, the words from Isaiah to love the Lord with all your heart and soul and mind and body. And the second is love your neighbor as yourself. That's I hope somebody will potentially say he did his best to live those words and to live the words of Matthew 25, where you look at what Jesus said there about helping those, the least of those. And that's what I'd like to be known by, not by any of these other things, but I'd like to be known by that.
I think that's the end of our interview.
Hallelujah.